Welcome to a fun edition of our Billions Educational Series with Nell Watson, a leading machine learning engineer, researcher, leading computer vision mind. Nell, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure.
The honor's all ours. So let's jump to computer vision. What is exciting you the most these days?
Well, I think about 10 years ago, we had this real revolution from deep learning and a subset of deep learning called convolutional neural networks. And that enabled us to teach computers to understand the world in new ways, to be able to recognize objects or to do complex transformations, such as to turn a scene recorded in daytime into night or vice versa. However, I think that we are coming now 10 years later to another discontinuity. We're coming to another revolution. And it's coming from these so-called attention-based models, similar to GPT-3 that some of you may have heard about. These are massive AI systems that have a colossal number of parameters. That's like little different switches or little different nodes that can collect nuances about information. Now, so far, these new techniques have been applied mostly towards text, making sense of all of the textual information on the internet, and they're enabling us to do things like solve high school algebra problems or translate poetry from one language into another, whilst keeping the meter as well as the meaning and intention behind the text. None of this was imagined to be feasible just a short while ago, at least anytime soon. So it's come as a bit of a surprise, the same way that deep learning did 10 years ago. But now we're learning that these new techniques for manipulating text in incredibly powerful ways can also be applied to vision. So we can break down images into little chunks and feed them in the same way, videos, of course, audio. So it seems as if this is a new way of ingressing and dealing with information in our world in a way which is much more complex and much more flexible, because deep learning was rather narrow in its focus. You could have something that was deep in how good it could be, but very narrow. It was only within a very specific use case or domain. These new techniques are much more general. They're much more flexible. And that means that AI is about to become far more capable in working with us and being useful to us. Because today we might talk to our electronic assistants and ask them whether it's going to rain today or who won the latest sports game. But now with this greater flexibility, we're going to be able to have meaningful conversations with these AI systems. They're going to be able to help us in new ways, and we're going to need to be socializing them in new ways as well, because they will become a social presence within our sphere of individuals and entities that we deal with on a daily basis. So we want to make them kind, polite, and able to serve as envoys for us into wider society.
Finally, the proliferation of the Jarvis. What an exciting time we're at.
Something a little bit like that. Yes, I think so. I think we're coming to a bit of a Sputnik moment in AI, because once people, anyone who's played around with GPT-3 tends to notice just how uncanny those conversations can be, as well as how funny it can be. And I think humor is a very important way of engaging with people. If you can make someone laugh, they hang on every word that you can say.
But humor's a mathematical humor is something that I used to discuss with my old business partner, Spencer Greenberg, is really a mathematical approach. It's about finding where someone's, ideals of the world lie, and then seeing their view and then making comments, with inversion that catch them off guard, and then they'll release their laughter. So, I'm excited to see humor, but how really intelligent do you think these Jarvis-like systems will be in the next 5, 10 years? Can you put an IQ number on that, or is that a poor question?
Well, unfortunately, we're still not really at a point where we can talk about machine learning so much as intelligence. The term artificial intelligence is in many ways a misnomer. A lot of these systems are closer to artificial intuition, if you will.
Mm.
They're able to make leaps of inference that otherwise might be challenging, but they can't necessarily cognitively work through a problem based on logic or a series of predicates, at least not very well. But that's still incredibly helpful. Our universe is filled with correlations and connections between things. Typically one side of our face mirrors the other. People with big hands tend to have big feet as well. Those are simple and obvious correlations. But many of our correlations between things are difficult for us to understand cognitively. We might have an intuition about something. We might have a gut feeling or a gut instinct, but we cannot express why we feel that is, what pattern or stimuli that we're responding to. But still, those intuitive hunches sometimes take us to places that otherwise we couldn't reach. And machines now are helping us to transcend our own limits of our intuition and to discern all kinds of connections which are beyond human level. The problem is, of course, that it's very difficult to debug where those hunches or intuitions came from. What was the information or the pattern or the signature that was detected? And for these reasons, then machine learning can have all kinds of untoward or unwarranted or undesired biases built into it.
Machine learning, unfortunately, does have natural bias. It's just how it's the nature of the beast, and you have to work around that. I always tell my students to try and minimize the use of machine learning as much as possible. Come up with your own thesis. Try to get as far as you can with the solution, and then use it at the very end. So you decided this works this way, and then once you can minimize, because frankly at this point machine learning isn't that intelligent, and so it's a good predictor. But so are you familiar with Judea Pearl, the UCLA professor who did a lot of work on predictive networks and predictive Bayesian networks?
Yes.
So Professor Pearl is now of the belief that going forward, there's going to be a lot more causality in machine learning, and that's kind of the future that he sees. And with that, we'll have much more efficiency. Now, it's a new point, and it's one that I'm starting to hear about from other people. And can you comment on causality and computer vision more specifically?
Well, yes, I think being able to understand previous information in time and to draw an inference about what might have happened is a very important part of intelligence. For example, human toddlers or apes can sometimes understand a very simple magic trick. Something is taken out of sight, and then the partition folds away. What happened to the object? And that's something that currently machine learning systems cannot really deal with. They cannot infer what might have happened to something like that. But I think that's going to be very important. If we can teach machines about causality, if we can invite them to deduce how a situation which was unseen might have transpired, then they will be able to cope with much greater uncertainty and be able to better understand nuanced situations, better understand things like security, or better understand some sort of social arts as well. You know,
Wonderful,
if
wonderful.
yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more with you, and wonderfully put. I want to pivot here to the Entrepreneur app, which is your new business. And as a female entrepreneur, I first want to ask, how do you find in the world today? Do you find that you're ever treated differently because you're a female versus a male? Is that something you've ever found at the end of the day you felt? One and two. Let's talk about the app itself.
Well, personally, I don't think that I've experienced any noticeably different treatment personally.
Wonderful.
Um,
It's fantastic to
and
hear.
certainly not in any in any negative sense.
Yeah.
In fact, I might have even gotten some slack at times,
Yeah.
extra than I didn't necessarily
Uh,
deserve
I love
when
the
I was
honesty.
younger
Mhm.
and a little more hot-headed than I am now. But um, yeah, I think that one of the most important aspects of startup life is being able to hold it all together, frankly. Being able to,
I completely agree. There are just so many loose ends.
exactly. It's a roller coaster. And on that roller coaster,
Mm.
those loose ends tend to fly everywhere, don't they? I mean, you're on a high 1 minute, there's something looks like you can just about clinch it, and then maybe it's snatched away and things go in a very different direction. And coping with that emotional journey is actually a very important aspect of entrepreneurship. And it's one that I have felt was a little bit under addressed at times. You know, there's plenty of wonderful books out there can teach you about product market fit and business model canvases and such, which is great. But those aspects of managing one's personal resources is um, not always taught or not always trained and not always available for learning. And I think at one point during a particularly tough time for myself, I I wanted to sublimate my emotions, that is to get them out of me into a productive enterprise. Um, and in so doing, if I could make somebody else have a slightly easier journey than my own, then I would feel that I could take some meaning from that difficult situation. And
That's
so
fantastic.
I've been working on this little game called Founder Life, which is a life simulation game in a sense. It simulates startup life, dealing with the process of transitioning from working in a job to doing a bit of freelancing, a bit of moonlighting, and getting out into startup life, dealing with your interactions with your romantic partner and their trepidation about you letting go of formal employment, and then dealing with clients and eventually dealing with mentors, investors, etc.
Mhm.
And during it, you're obliged to make choices where sometimes there is no right answer. It's really the answer that you can best live with. And often, uh, in any difficult endeavor, that's how things go. So you have to manage your physical energy, so you don't physically burn out. You have to manage uh, your ability to have some fun and a bit of mindfulness, your ability to be productive, as well, of course, your cash. You don't want to run out of cash in the meantime.
Yes.
And so keeping all of those things in balance is a little bit like a spinning top. You have to keep adding momentum to it at just the right way, just the right angle. But my hope is that it can help all kinds of entrepreneurs around the world to have an easier ride with it, and um, to learn some skills that will help them along their respective journeys.
No, it sounds like a very necessary item. The mental stress that comes with startup life is unique, and it's consistently felt. I've never come across a founder who didn't feel alone, didn't feel scared. It's a very painful time. So, your app really sounds, very useful for the world out there. So I'm excited you made it. Giving back is a fantastic thing, and when you can give back and create something with intelligence, that's a fantastic combination, which is what it looks like you've done here. So wonderful. I guess as we get to the end of our show, do you have any concluding thoughts for our viewers? Anything you'd like to share?
Well, I suppose
And also,
I
please
have
share where
a.
to download this too. Of course, your website and
Oh,
so they can
sure.
get
Maybe
this.
you could put the link up there.
Oh, definitely.
And yeah, I have another initiative that I suppose I'd love people's feedback on, and that's something that I'm calling culturalpeace.org. So that's an attempt to put together some principles that help to reduce or manage some of the polarization within society, to get people communicating in ways which are a little bit more helpful and positive, and essentially to create meta rules around conflict, a little bit like a Geneva Conventions for the Culture War. That's something that former Senator Orrin Hatch called for in an essay, and I was very moved by it, and I thought, this is important, why don't we try and do it? So I've put up some suggestions, and I invite responses from the community to check it out and make any amendments or additions as they see fit. And that's available at culturalpeace.org.
Wonderful. Well, I hope our viewers will go check it out and give you feedback. This was a fantastic conversation, Nell, and we really appreciate you lending us your brilliant mind for a few minutes, and you stay safe during these crazy times, okay?
Will do. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Pleasure was ours entirely.